She was nobody. A nurse with 12 years of experience, invisible in the hallways of Metropolitan Hospital. Nobody expected her to save anyone. Nobody expected her to sacrifice everything. But when a legendary musician, whose name had shaped generations, arrived in intensive care, Sarah Anderson made a choice that would destroy her career, test her morality, and reveal the darkest secret buried in his past. What started as compassion would become betrayal. What she thought was heroism would become her greatest sin. This is the story of how saving one life meant destroying another.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song, a sound Sarah Anderson had learned to tune out years ago, the way soldiers learn to ignore explosions. She moved through the intensive care unit at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, her footsteps muffled by the linoleum floor, worn smooth by a decade of desperate families and exhausted healthcare workers. The Metropolitan Hospital's ICU was a kingdom of monitored heartbeats and beeping machines, where hope and despair lived in adjacent rooms. Sarah pushed the medication cart with one hand, her clipboard tucked under her arm, her mind already running through the mental checklist that kept people alive. Vital signs, fluid intake, medication dosages, wound assessments. The routine was so ingrained in her muscle memory that she could do it in her sleep, and frankly, some days it felt like she was. She was 38 years old and felt 90. "Anderson, you missed the pressure reading on bed 4, Dr. James Whitmore called out from the nursing station, not bothering to look up from his computer. He was young, maybe 32, with the crisp white coat that still carried the smell of detergent. He'd been at Metropolitan for 3 months. Sarah had been there 12 years. "I'll check it now, doctor," Sarah replied, already moving toward bed 4. She didn't bother to explain that she documented the reading 15 minutes ago, before Dr. Whitmore had even arrived for his shift. Explanations weren't worth the energy anymore. Explaining implied that your work mattered enough to be worth understanding. Bed 4 held Mr. Patterson, a 71-year-old man with pneumonia who was deteriorating faster than anyone had predicted. Sarah had noticed the decline yesterday, subtle signs that the doctors wouldn't catch for another 6 hours. The way his breathing had shifted, the faint discoloration under his fingernails, the way his eyes didn't quite focus. She'd reported it to the evening shift supervisor, who'd reported it to the doctor on call, who'd adjusted the antibiotics. That was how it worked. Sarah observed, doctors decided, patients lived or died based on whether anyone listened to her observations. She was the invisible messenger in a hierarchy that measured worth by the diploma hanging on the wall. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," she said softly, checking the monitor. His oxygen saturation was at 86%. Not good. She made a note, knowing the doctors would see it in an hour, knowing they'd wonder why she hadn't called immediately, knowing they'd blame her either way. "Sarah," a weak voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Marcus Chin, one of the few doctors who actually treated her like a human being. He held 2 steaming cups of coffee, bad hospital coffee, but hot coffee nonetheless. "I grabbed an extra, thought you might need it." She turned, surprised. "Thank you, Marcus. That's thoughtful." "You look like you haven't slept," he said, handing her a cup. He was in his mid-40s, with reading glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, and a kind of expression that seemed almost anachronistic in modern medicine. New rejection? Sarah had applied to an advanced nursing program 6 months ago, a master's degree program that would have elevated her status from nurse to advanced practice nurse. Better pay, better hours, more respect. She'd been rejected 3 weeks ago. The email was polite, but clear. Too many applicants with stronger credentials, better GPA, more research experience. What it meant was, you're not good enough. They sent the final list yesterday, she admitted, sipping the coffee. It was awful, but she was grateful anyway. There's a wait list. They said I should reapply next year with more published research. Sarah, you're one of the best clinical nurses I've worked with in 15 years, Marcus said firmly. That program's a loss. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But belief didn't pay the bills or change the way Dr. Whitmore looked through me like I was part of the furniture. Before Marcus could continue, an alarm sounded from the emergency bay. Not unusual in the ICU, alarms were the ambient sound of a hospital, the constant reminder that people were always on the edge of not existing. But this alarm was accompanied by shouting, by the controlled urgency that only came with critical cases. Bay 3, Marcus said, and he was already moving. She watched him go, then returned to her routine. There was always an emergency. There was always another crisis. The world kept spinning, and people like her kept it spinning, invisible, quiet, and competent, and utterly undervalued. She didn't know as she walked her cart toward the next patient that her entire life was about to change. She didn't know that the emergency in Bay 3 would bring someone who would make her question everything she believed about herself, about justice, and about the price of doing the right thing. Around 8:15 a.m., a man was wheeled into the ICU on a stretcher. He was 74 years old, his head wrapped in protective gauze, his face bruised almost black. The chart said he'd fallen in his home studio, hit his head on a concrete floor, and spent 4 hours before anyone found him. Subdural hematoma, brain bleed, critical but stable for now. She only saw him in passing as Dr. Whitmore's team set up his bed. She didn't read the name on the chart carefully. She didn't pause to look at his face. To her, he was just another admission, another monitor to check, another person whose life or death would largely depend on luck, timing, and whether the attending physician was having a good day. She had no idea she was looking at legend. Around 10:30 a.m., while Sarah was completing her morning assessments, Marcus appeared at the medication station. He looked strange, excited, and guilty at the same time, like a child who had accidentally found out where his parents hid Christmas presents. "Did you hear about the new admission in Bay 3? He asked, trying to sound casual. "No," Sarah said, labeling medication vials. "Just another critical. What's different?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "His name is Robert Stone, but everyone knows him as," he paused for effect, "Stone Serenade, the guitarist from Midnight Rebellion." Sarah stopped. She was born in 1987. She'd grown up in the 90s. She didn't have strong personal memories of Midnight Rebellion. That was her parents' era. They were the kind of band that defined a generation. "The Stone?" she asked quietly. "The Stone," Marcus confirmed. "Fall in his studio, bleed on the brain. We're doing everything we can, but honestly, his family has him on DNR, do not resuscitate. If he codes, we let him go." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not because this man was famous. Lots of famous people get sick. Lots of famous people die. But there was something about the combination, a living legend, brought low by something as mundane as a fall, possibly ending his life in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and people who didn't know him, didn't understand the weight of what his presence meant to the world. "Which bed?" she asked. "Bed 7, Marcus said. "Anyway, the family is flying in this afternoon. Media's going to be a nightmare. They're already outside trying to get past security." "Do they know?" she asked. "The public?" "Not yet, but they will soon. Something like this, a living legend, it'll be everywhere by tonight." After Marcus left, Sarah found herself gravitating toward bed 7. She told herself it was just routine. She needed to check on all her patients anyway. But as she approached, she slowed her steps, looking at the man with new context. She could see it now. Even through the bruising, even through the tubes and monitors and medical apparatus, she could see the structure of his face, the shape of a man who had once commanded stages, who had made millions of people feel alive through the vibration of guitar strings. He was still unconscious. His vital signs were stable, but fragile, like a house of cards that the slightest breeze could topple. "Hello, Mr. Stone," she said softly, checking his IV line. She didn't expect a response. She didn't get one. But she felt the weight of the moment anyway. The strange collision between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between her invisible daily work and the rare moment when she found herself in proximity to something that the rest of the world cared about. She had no idea how prophetic her words would become. She had no idea that over the next 2 weeks, she would make choices that would destroy her career, that would force her to face corruption and cruelty at the highest levels, that would make her complicit in something that would haunt her forever. All she knew in that moment was that this man, this legend who had once seemed unreachable, was now completely vulnerable, completely dependent on the skills and choices of people like her. She had no idea that vulnerability was the most dangerous thing of all. 3 days after Robert Stone arrived, Sarah discovered something in his medical file that changed everything. Not about his condition, about his past, about the patient in bed 5, and about the conspiracy that would force her to choose between saving a life and protecting a secret that could destroy multiple families.
The first 3 days followed a predictable pattern. Stone remained unconscious. His family arrived. A well-dressed woman in her 60s, his ex-wife, a younger man in his 40s, his son, and a younger woman in her late 30s, his daughter. They sat in the family room, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally asking Sarah questions about his condition with the kind of desperate hope that all ICU families carried. The media outside grew more aggressive. Reporters set up camp in the hospital lobby. The hospital administration sent around memos about discretion and maintaining patient privacy. Of course, patient privacy was impossible now. Stone's presence was the open secret that everyone whispered about. Sarah watched it all with detachment. To her, famous or not, Robert Stone was a patient. He needed monitoring, medication, cleanliness, and care. She provided those things with the same professionalism she gave to everyone else. But on the 4th day, something shifted. Sarah was filling out her shift notes when she noticed something odd about Stone's chart, specifically about his intake information. His emergency contact listed his son as primary decision-maker, but there were medical annotations suggesting complex family dynamics. She wouldn't have paid attention to the administrative detail, but one name appeared multiple times: Dr. Richard Chen. Chen, that was Marcus's last name. Curious, she pulled up the note more carefully. Dr. Richard Chen had been Stone's personal physician for the past 5 years, and his contact information, it was Marcus Chen's home address. That was strange enough that Sarah decided to ask Marcus directly. She found him at the nursing station around 2 p.m. "Is Dr. Richard Chen related to you?" she asked casually. Marcus looked up and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe something else. "He's my father," he said carefully. "Why?" "He's listed as Stone's personal physician," Sarah said. "Just wondering about the connection." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed and gestured for her to follow him into the supply closet, a place where conversations wouldn't be overheard by the constant stream of hospital traffic. "My father is retiring," Marcus said quietly. "Stone is one of his last major patients. Wealthy guy, paid for private care. My dad handed off the medical files to me since he's stepping back." "Why didn't you mention that?" Sarah asked. "Because it's complicated," Marcus admitted. "My father and Stone knew each other before he became his doctor. They were friends, I guess, from the old days. But there's baggage there, family stuff. My dad asked me to be discreet." Sarah filed this information away. It didn't seem immediately relevant to Stone's care, but something about it felt off. The way Marcus avoided eye contact, the way he'd felt the need to explain in a closet rather than at the station. "Okay, thanks for clarifying," Sarah said. That evening, during her chart review before the night shift, Sarah did something she normally wouldn't do. She pulled up the medical records for Bed 5. Bed 5 held a 68-year-old man named William Patterson. Not the same Patterson from Bed 4. This was a different patient, admitted 2 days ago with the diagnosis of advanced pancreatic cancer, palliative care. He was expected to survive maybe another month, possibly less. His chart noted that he received regular visitors, listed as family and friends. His emergency contact was Margaret Patterson, wife of 42 years. Sarah wouldn't have thought anything of it, Except she happened to pass bed 5 during a medication delivery, and she glanced at the man's face, really looked at him, and she recognized him. She didn't know from where at first. It bothered her all through her evening tasks. That face, where had she seen it? Then it hit her. She knew because she'd done an internet search on Robert Stone while on her break, just casual curiosity, and she'd seen photos. She'd seen photos of a young Robert Stone with various people throughout the 70s and 80s. One of those people, appearing frequently in photos from 1978 to 1980, was a young man who looked remarkably like the current patient in bed 5. Sarah pulled up the old articles on her phone during her next break. She cross-referenced the photos. She checked the name in bed 5 again. William Patterson, but in the photos he was credited as William Cross. William Cross, who had been the original manager for Midnight Rebellion, William Cross, who had disappeared from the music industry in 1981, who had never appeared in any retrospective or reunion despite the band's continued prominence. Why would Stone's former manager be in the bed next to him, unknown and unvisited by Stone's family? Sarah did what she probably shouldn't have done. She accessed the full patient intake for William Patterson, looking for a cross-reference to Robert Stone. Nothing. The systems didn't link them. They were just two old men in critical/palliative care occupying adjacent beds in the ICU. But then she saw something in William's chart that made her stop breathing. There was a psychiatric evaluation from intake. In the note, William had written something in response to reason for admission. I need to see him one more time. I need to tell him what I did. 3 questions exploded in Sarah's mind simultaneously. What did he do? See who? And why was Robert Stone that person? She should have left it alone. She knew she should have left it alone. HIPAA violations weren't a game. Violating patient privacy was grounds for immediate termination and possibly legal action. But something in her, something that had been building from years of invisibility, from years of having her observations and instincts dismissed, from years of caring for people but never mattering enough to be heard, made her keep digging. She carefully, casually reviewed William's previous hospital records. His intake paperwork from 5 years ago listed his occupation as retired from entertainment management. His wife Margaret was listed as his emergency contact. There was a note about a hospital visit from Marcus Chen, not as his doctor, but as a visitor. Years ago, before Marcus had even finished his residency. Why would Marcus, as a resident, be visiting a random cancer patient? Unless it wasn't random. Sarah's mind started assembling pieces. Marcus knew Stone. Marcus's father was Stone's doctor. William Cross had been Stone's manager and had disappeared in 1981, the same year Stone's first platinum album dropped and Midnight Rebellion became superstars. William was now in palliative care in the bed next to Stone, saying he needed to tell him what he did.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was probably wrong. She was almost certainly wrong. But the pattern was too clear to ignore. That night during her rounds, Sarah found herself lingering at William's bedside. He was sleeping. His breathing labored. He was on morphine for pain management. He had maybe days left, possibly only hours. "What did you do?" she whispered to the unconscious man. He didn't respond, but his monitor showed a spike in heart rate, as if something in his subconscious had registered her words. Around midnight, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled up Stone's file and looked for psychiatric evaluations or intake notes that might mention William or anyone named Cross. She found it buried in the admissions records. A note from the ER doctor on intake. Patient has emergency contact as Richard Chen, MD. However, patient has DNR status requested by son, unusual. Family also requested that patient be placed on floor where he would not encounter William Patterson, current resident, bed 5.
Reason given, personal/family reasons, noted but honored. Patient moved to different floor originally, but readmitted today via emergency, assigned to ICU bed 7, suggest follow-up. The implication was clear. Robert Stone's family had specifically requested that he not encounter William Patterson. When Stone was initially admitted, the hospital had honored that request, but when he needed emergency admission to the ICU following complications, that request had been lost in the triage shuffle. Now they were in adjacent beds, and William was dying. Sarah stood in the hallway, her hands shaking. She had just discovered that there was something between these two men, something significant enough that a famous musician's family would demand they not be in the same location, something that a dying man felt desperately urgent to confess. She had 3 options. First, she could forget what she learned, maintain professionalism, and keep her mouth shut. Second, she could report the suspicious situation to hospital administration. Third, she could ask someone what was really going on. She chose wrong. She chose option 3. Specifically, she chose to ask Marcus. She found him in the doctor's lounge around 1 a.m. He was sitting alone, reviewing a chart, looking exhausted. "We need to talk," Sarah said quietly. Marcus looked up, saw her face, and immediately looked guilty. Not confused, not innocent, guilty. "Not here," he said, standing. "Come on." He led her to an empty patient consultation room and closed the door. "What do you know?" he asked directly. "I know that William Patterson used to be William Cross. I know he managed Midnight Rebellion. I know your family is connected to both men. And I know that Stone's family specifically requested that he not see William Patterson. So I'm asking, what's going on?" Marcus sat down heavily. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 4 days. "This isn't my story to tell," he said finally. "And if you pursue this, Sarah, you're going to destroy people, multiple people, families." "So there is something," Sarah said. "Of course there's something," Marcus snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. My father told me this in confidence. It's been a secret for 40 years. "A secret about what?" Sarah pressed. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he seemed to make a decision. In 1981, William Cross made a choice that derailed his entire life. He embezzled money from Midnight Rebellion, a lot of money. Money that was supposed to be reinvested in the band, in their career. Instead, he took it. Robert Stone found out. Instead of pressing charges, instead of having William arrested, Stone made him disappear, made him a non-person. William went into hiding for years. So, why is he here now? Why isn't he in prison? Because the statute of limitations ran out long ago, and because Stone's family realized, finally, that they were afraid of William, afraid he'd talk, afraid that the story would come out. William's trying to reconcile now before he dies. He wants forgiveness. And Stone's family is terrified because if the truth came out, it would destroy the narrative of their golden legacy. Sarah felt her stomach twist. "So you're asking me to keep quiet? To let a man die without confronting the person he needs to forgive?" "I'm asking you to understand that this isn't our story," Marcus said urgently. "This isn't about hospital care. This is about family trauma and old wounds. If you interfere, if you push this, you're not helping anyone. You're just making it worse." Sarah stood up. She felt something crystallizing inside her, clarity and purpose and a terrible sense of responsibility. "William's dying," she said quietly. "He might have days, maybe less, and he wants to tell Robert the truth. Don't you think Robert deserves to hear it? Don't you think William deserves to have that conversation?" "Sarah, no!" But she was already moving. She had the nurse station's phone, and she was looking up Marcus's father's home number. She would call him. She would explain that her patient's former manager was dying in the adjacent bed. She would force this conversation into the open.
She was so focused on making the call that she almost didn't notice Marcus step in front of her, almost didn't see the desperation in his eyes. "Please, please don't do this," he said. But Sarah was done being invisible, done making nice choices that kept systems in place, done protecting powerful people while powerless people suffered. She picked up the phone. And that's when everything fell apart. Marcus didn't stop her. Instead, he walked away. And 10 minutes later, Robert Stone woke up. For the first time since his fall, the legendary musician opened his eyes with full clarity. And the first thing he did was ask for Sarah, because Marcus had called his father, and his father had told him everything that Sarah didn't know, everything that changed what the truth actually was.
Robert Stone's eyes opened at 3:47 a.m. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't the slow return to consciousness that brain injuries typically produced. His eyes simply opened, completely, alertly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Sarah, conducting her routine check of his vitals, stopped in her tracks. "Mr. Stone," she said carefully, "can you hear me?" "Water," he croaked. His voice was rough, unused, but unmistakably present. "Please." Sarah's training kicked in. She adjusted his bed, helped him sip water through a straw, immediately began monitoring his responses. His pupils were reactive. His speech was clear. His mental status appeared intact. This was good. This was excellent news medically. It was terrible news for everything else. "I need to speak with you," Stone said once he'd rested. His eyes were focusing more clearly now. "Before I speak to my family. Before I lose this clarity. If I do." "I'll get your doctor," Sarah said, reaching for the call button. "No," Stone said, with surprising firmness. "You, the nurse. The one who looked at me like a person, not a name. Please." Sarah hesitated, then sat in the chair beside his bed. "Richard came to see me," Stone continued. "I don't remember clearly. I was dreaming, but also awake, and he was here, talking to me. Or maybe I was dreaming it. But he told me about Marcus calling him, about a nurse who knew about William." Sarah's heart began to race. "Mr. Stone, Do you know who William is?" Stone interrupted. "I think I do. William Cross, your former manager?" Stone smiled, a sad, complicated expression. "My former everything," he said. "My friend, my business partner, my betrayer, my brother, essentially, though we never used that word." He coughed, and Sarah helped him with more water. "In 1981, William did something that I'm going to tell you about, and then I'm going to tell you what I did in response. And then maybe you'll understand why I can't see him, why I won't see him." Sarah wanted to leave. She knew she should leave. This wasn't her patient interaction to have. This was private, personal, family business. But Stone's eyes held her in place. "I was 29 years old. He was 31. Midnight Rebellion was exploding. We were on the edge of everything we dreamed of. But we were also catastrophically poor. The money was there in theory, platinum records, sold-out shows, but in practice, it wasn't in our hands. Our contracts were terrible. We'd signed them when we were desperate and stupid. Our management took half, our record label took the rest. We were famous and broke." Stone paused, his breathing labored from the effort of talking. William found a way around it. He created shell accounts. He diverted royalties. Over 18 months, he moved $3 million out of the official channels into accounts he controlled. $3 million that belonged to the band, to our families, to our future. He was going to eventually tell us, he claimed later. He was going to set us up for life, keep us independent, free from the parasites. But first, he needed to move it all. "Why didn't he?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because I caught him," Stone said. "I was going through paperwork.
boring business stuff that William usually handled, and I found the discrepancies. I confronted him, and he confessed. He said the money was for all of us. He said he was protecting us. Stone's monitor showed elevated heart rate. Sarah wanted to tell him to rest, to continue this conversation later, but he pressed on. And I did something that I've been running from for 40 years. I gave him a choice. He could return the money, somehow impossibly, and disappear. Or I would turn him over to the FBI. I said it with the authority of a 29-year-old man who just discovered betrayal. I said it like I meant it. Did he return the money? Sarah asked quietly. Some of it. He liquidated everything, emptied those accounts, and the money went back to the record label. But by then, we'd announced he was leaving the band for personal reasons. He disappeared, and the rest of us, we told ourselves the money was recovered, the problem was solved, and it was time to move forward. Stone closed his eyes. Except nothing was actually solved. We were still bound by terrible contracts. The money that was returned went to the label's pockets, not ours. And William spent the next 40 years as a ghost. I don't even know how much he suffered. I never looked. I never wanted to know. Why not? Sarah asked. Because Stone opened his eyes and looked directly at her. If I looked, if I acknowledged his humanity, I would have to acknowledge that I'd destroyed him over pride and anger, that I'd chosen a perfect image, Robert Stone, too noble to press charges against his betraying friend, over actually helping the friend. The truth is, I was angry, I was hurt, and I wanted him to hurt too. Stone coughed again, harder this time. You should get my doctor, he said when he'd recovered. But before Sarah could move, Stone grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but urgent. Is he alive? William, is he still in this hospital? Sarah felt the question like a trap. She knew what the answer meant. She knew that Stone had heard, through Richard Chen, through Marcus, that William was in bed 5, that William was dying, that William had asked to see him one last time before he left this world. She had two choices: lie or tell the truth and potentially set off a series of events that she couldn't control. She told the truth. Yes, he's in bed 5. Stone released her wrist and closed his eyes. A tear ran down the side of his face. Then bring him here, he said quietly, or bring me there. However it works, I need to speak with him before the end. Sarah left his bed and walked directly to the nursing station. Her mind was spinning. This wasn't appropriate. Patients couldn't just visit other patients in the ICU. There were protocols, procedures, medical considerations. But as she was about to call the night supervisor, Marcus appeared. He woke up, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Sarah asked. My father called again. He said to tell you that the story I told you was incomplete, that there's more you need to understand before you judge either of them. Sarah felt anger spike in her chest. So you're asking me to keep the patients apart? Is that what this is? No, Marcus said heavily. I'm asking you to understand that when you push secrets into the light, you don't know what shadows you're going to cast. Come on, my father wants to explain. He's coming to the hospital. He should be here in 20 minutes. I don't have time for explanations, Sarah said. I have patients, one of whom is asking you to facilitate a reunion that will destroy you professionally. So yes, you have time. Sarah wanted to refuse, but the truth was she was already in too deep. Her investigation had already violated multiple privacy regulations. Her confrontation with Marcus had already set this chain of events in motion. She could either understand what was happening and make informed decisions, or she could stumble forward blindly. She made the wrong choice. She chose to understand. 20 minutes later, she sat in a quiet consultation room with Dr. Richard Chen, Marcus's father, Stone's former personal physician. He was in his 70s, with gray hair and a haunted expression that suggested he'd been carrying this burden for a very long time. "I need to tell you what really happened in 1981, Richard said without preamble, "because if I don't, and if you proceed with facilitating a meeting between William and Robert, you're going to be instrumental in a profound injustice." Sarah listened as Richard told her a story that inverted everything she thought she understood. William Cross hadn't been stealing from the band, he had been stealing for them. The record label, working with corrupt executives, had been systematically embezzling the band's money through fake expenses, phantom accounting, and creative fraud. William had discovered it. Instead of reporting it through official channels, which were controlled by the same people doing the embezzling, he had decided to fight fire with fire. He'd created those shell accounts to move money out of reach of the thieves with the plan to eventually distribute it to the band members directly. Outside of the system that was robbing them, he succeeded in moving $3 million, but then he made a mistake. He told Robert Stone about the plan, probably wanting approval, wanting to feel like the hero who was going to save them all. And Robert Stone went to the police, not believing William, believing that his friend had betrayed him. And William, facing federal charges for embezzlement, had been told by his lawyer to accept a deal. Disappear, repay as much as possible through liquidated assets, and walk away free. The alternative was trial, prison, and the destruction of the band through scandal.
So William had accepted the deal. He'd liquidated everything and paid the money back. He'd disappeared, and Robert Stone had gotten away with destroying his best friend. He did go into the accounting records years later, Richard continued. After the label executives were eventually prosecuted for fraud, something that happened in the mid-90s, he discovered that William had actually been right, that William had been trying to save them, but by then, William was a ghost. Robert never looked for him, never tried to find him and apologize, never offered restitution or explanation. He just moved on. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand. "Because William's wife reached out to me a month ago," Richard said. "She told me that her husband was dying, that he had one last wish, to speak with Robert and know whether Robert had ever discovered the truth, whether Robert had ever realized that the man he'd destroyed had actually been trying to save him." "And does Stone know?" Sarah asked. "He didn't until tonight," Richard said. "My son told him everything, the real story, not the version Stone has been telling himself for 40 years. Sarah stood up. She felt suddenly dizzy, like the floor beneath her had shifted. "So, what you're saying is that I caused this? My investigation, my phone call, my need to know the truth, it exposed a secret that was better left buried?" "I'm saying," Richard said carefully, "that secrets buried for 40 years have a way of poisoning everything they touch, and sometimes the poison leaks out in ways nobody expects." "What do I do?" Sarah asked desperately. "You help them see each other," Richard said. "William is dying. Robert is awake and aware, possibly for the last time before infection or complications claim him. They deserve a conversation. They deserve closure, and you are the person in a position to make that happen." "I could lose my license. I could lose my job." "Yes," Richard agreed. "You probably could." Sarah thought about the program she'd been rejected from. She thought about 12 years of being invisible, of having her judgments dismissed, of being trapped in a hierarchy where people like her didn't matter. She thought about Robert Stone waking up with one clear mission: to see the man he'd wronged. And she thought about William in bed 5, waiting to die, wondering if the man who'd destroyed him had ever understood why. "I'll need to sedate them both lightly," she said quietly, "so they can move without it being medically dangerous. I'll need a wheelchair for William. And I'll need to do this very carefully so the night supervisor doesn't see on the cameras." "Sarah?" Richard began. "No," she said. "You want me to help them. I'm helping them, but I'm doing it correctly, medically, as a nurse who actually cares about her patients. It took 30 minutes of careful preparation. Sarah administered mild sedatives to both patients, enough to keep them calm and pain-free, not enough to make them unconscious. She got William into a wheelchair, covered him with blankets to hide the IV lines and monitors. She told the night supervisor that she was moving him to a different bed for cleaning, a lie that was routine enough not to raise suspicion. She wheeled William to Stone's bedside at 4:23 a.m. The reunion happened in silence. William's eyes, when he saw Robert Stone, conscious and aware, filled with tears. Robert reached out and took William's hand. No words. For a long moment, just two old men holding on to each other across a span of 40 years of pain. Then William began to speak. He told Robert everything. The embezzlement, the real reason for it, the fear of prosecution, the decades of not knowing if Robert would ever understand. His words were halting, fractured, but genuine. Robert listened. And when William finished, Robert told him the truth. That he'd learned what William had actually been doing. That he'd known for years. And that he'd never tried to find him because he was ashamed. Ashamed of what he'd done. Ashamed that he had been too proud to apologize. Ashamed that he had let his friend disappear. "I forgave you a long time ago," Robert said quietly. "I just never told you. I was too much of a coward." William sobbed, not dramatically, but deeply, as if 40 years of grief were finally finding release. Sarah watched from a distance, her hand on the IV monitor, ready to intervene if either patient showed signs of distress. But they didn't. They were simply present with each other, holding hands, speaking in low voices about the years between them. At 5:15 a.m., William's condition deteriorated slightly. His breathing became more labored. Sarah wheeled him back to his bed, but not before Robert gripped her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for giving us this." "Don't thank me yet," Sarah said quietly. But she was already thinking about the consequences. The supervising nurse would check the cameras. Eventually, they would see that she'd moved a critical patient without authorization. They would see that she had administered unauthorized sedation. They would see that she had violated about 20 different protocols. She had just ensured her own destruction. She finished her shift and drove home to her apartment, a small, modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. She sat on her couch as dawn broke, watching the light change through her windows, understanding that by evening her career would be over. She was surprised when her phone rang at 7:30 a.m. It was the hospital. Not the nursing supervisor, the hospital administrator. "Mrs. Anderson," the voice said, "this is Margaret Stone. I'm Robert's ex-wife. I'm also the primary medical decision-maker for his care. I need to speak with you." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Stone, Not over the phone," Margaret said. "I'm coming to see you. I'll be at your apartment in 20 minutes. Please be home." Margaret Stone arrived in a black car driven by someone who looked like security. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, with the appearance of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing complex social situations. She sat on Sarah's couch without being invited, examining the modest apartment with obvious assessment. "My ex-husband told me what happened this morning. He told me that you violated multiple hospital protocols to facilitate a meeting between him and William Cross." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Normally, I would be filing complaints," Margaret continued. "I would be demanding your termination. My family has lawyers who specialize in medical malpractice and violations. We could destroy you professionally." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But I won't be doing that. And I'm going to tell you why. And then I'm going to tell you what's actually going to happen instead." Margaret stood and walked to Sarah's small kitchen window, looking out at the city. 40 years ago, she said, I was married to Robert Stone. I was young, beautiful, and completely in love with a man who was becoming a legend. But I was also in love with a man who was fundamentally broken. Because what he'd done to William, destroying his friend, exiling him, and then never trying to fix it,
That broke something in Robert that never fully healed. He drank, he was unfaithful, he was angry at the world but couldn't articulate why. Our marriage ended because he was a man living with unresolved guilt. Margaret turned back to Sarah. Last night, my ex-husband was finally able to speak with the person he'd wronged. For the first time in 40 years, he was able to apologize. And you made that possible. And yes, you broke rules doing it, but you also did something that no medical intervention could do. You helped him become a better man. That doesn't matter if I lose my license, Sarah said. It won't, Margaret said firmly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to face a formal review. There'll be an investigation into your conduct. But that investigation is going to be conducted very carefully with lawyers present and with the family's full cooperation. We're going to cooperate with the hospital, and we're going to make sure that the narrative around what happened is clear. The narrative? Sarah asked. That you observed critical medical concerns with patient in bed 5, that you recommended a therapeutic intervention to reduce his psychological distress in his final days, that we approved that intervention as his medical decision-maker, that this intervention was ultimately beneficial to his health outcomes. Sarah stared at her. You're lying. You're saying you approved it? I'm saying that Robert will say I approved it, and he's Robert Stone. His voice carries weight. The hospital will want to protect itself from litigation more than it will want to crucify you. You'll face a reprimand. You might have to do some retraining, but you won't lose your license. You won't even lose your job if you don't want to stay there. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked. Because 40 years of my life was spent married to a man broken by his own guilt, and I know what it's like to watch someone eat themselves alive from the inside out. And because you did something courageous last night, real courage, not the comfortable kind. And I think people who do that deserve to survive the consequences. Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, she said. William Cross is still alive. He's been given a few more days, possibly a week, with aggressive pain management and palliative care. Robert is asking to see him again, with your help, in a way that's medically sustainable. Would you be willing to facilitate that? Sarah thought about her career, about her future, about all the invisible years she'd spent in the hospital. Yes, she said, I would.
Sarah thought she'd made her choice. She thought facilitating that one meeting was the height of her rebellion against the system, but she was wrong. Because what happened next would force her to face the darkest truth, that the story she'd been told wasn't the whole story, that there were layers of deception so deep that even Margaret Stone didn't know the full truth, and that her choice to help might not have been heroic at all. It might have been complicit in a cover-up that had consequences she couldn't have imagined. The formal review began 3 days later. Sarah sat in a hospital conference room with the lawyer that Margaret Stone had hired for her, a hospital administrator, and the chief medical officer. The investigation was thorough, but oddly gentle. Yes, she'd violated protocols. Yes, she'd administered unauthorized sedation. Yes, she'd moved a critical patient without proper authorization. But the narrative that Margaret had promised held. Robert Stone confirmed that he'd requested the meeting. Margaret Stone confirmed that she'd approved it as the medical decision-maker, a lie that was elegant enough that nobody pushed back hard on it. And the doctors admitted that the therapeutic benefits, Robert's improved mental state, his increased cooperation with treatment, his overall stabilization, seemed to outweigh the procedural violations. By the end of the review, Sarah received an official reprimand and was required to attend a 6-week retraining program on hospital protocols. Her license was never in danger. Her job was secure. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt increasingly unsettled. It was Marcus who finally explained why, pulling her into a supply closet again on her first day back to work after the review concluded. My father wanted me to tell you something. something that he couldn't say in the meeting because it would have complicated the narrative we'd all agreed to. "What?" Sarah asked warily. "William didn't embezzle money," Marcus said quietly. "That entire story my father told you was a lie." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her again. "What?" "The truth is worse," Marcus continued. "William did steal from the band. Deliberately. He embezzled $3 million over 2 years with the specific intention of taking it for himself. He was going to leave the country with it. Robert caught him. But instead of turning him into the police, Robert agreed to a different arrangement. William would liquidate the stolen funds, return the money, and then disappear. In exchange, Robert wouldn't prosecute. "But your father said," Sarah began. "My father lied," Marcus said quietly. "My father has been protecting William for 40 years because my father knew why William stole the money. My father was William's lover. My father is why William stole." Sarah processed this. The implications were staggering. "William was going to use the money to run away with my father," Marcus continued. "They were going to leave their families, their lives, their entire histories, and start over somewhere else. But my father got cold feet. He decided he couldn't leave his wife, couldn't leave his medical practice, couldn't do it. So William's elaborate embezzlement scheme fell apart, and my father has spent 40 years feeling guilty about it. So the story about protecting the band was a story my father invented to make himself feel less guilty, to make William seem like he was a good person who did a bad thing for a noble reason, rather than a man who betrayed his best friend to fund an affair." Sarah felt sick. "And Robert Stone?" "Robert Stone has spent 40 years thinking he did William a favor by not prosecuting. Robert thinks he was noble. Robert thinks he was merciful. Meanwhile, William has been living with the knowledge that Robert never would have done that if Robert had known the real reason William was stealing." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because my father asked me to," Marcus said. "Because my father is dying. He has pancreatic cancer, same as William, actually, and he's trying to clean up his conscience before he goes. He wanted you to know that you weren't a hero. You were an instrument in a deception." "What am I supposed to do with this information?" Sarah demanded. "Nothing. You're supposed to go home and live your life and understand that sometimes the most ethical choice we can make is to do nothing, to let people believe the lies that help them sleep at night." Sarah left the supply closet and walked through the hallway of the hospital in a daze. She went to bed 7, where Robert Stone was still recovering, still improving, still living in the comfortable lie that his mercy towards William had been noble, rather than merely pragmatic. She went to bed 5, where William was actively dying, his body finally surrendering to the cancer that had been eating away at him for months. She thought about the choice she'd made to facilitate their reunion. She thought about the consequences. Her career upheld, her reputation intact, her life essentially unchanged by the decision to help. But that's not what was sitting in her stomach like a stone. What was sitting in her stomach was the realization that helping Robert and William speak to each other had allowed them both to maintain their delusions. Robert got to feel noble, William got to feel forgiven, and nobody had to face the actual truth of what happened between them. And Sarah had been instrumental in making sure that lie stayed buried. That evening, Sarah made a decision. She requested to speak with William privately. It took some arrangement. She had to convince the night supervisor that it was for pain management assessment, but eventually she got 20 minutes alone with him. William was very frail now. He had maybe 3 days left, possibly less. His breathing was thin, his skin nearly translucent. "Do you want to know the truth?" Sarah asked him directly. "What truth?" William asked, his voice barely audible. about why Robert never prosecuted you, about why he let you disappear instead of destroying you. Because he was merciful, William said, but there was a question in his voice, as if he'd always suspected there was more. Because he didn't want a scandal. Because he knew that if anyone found out what you'd stolen and why, his entire reputation would be tainted. Because he was protecting himself, not protecting you. William closed his eyes. "You don't know that," he whispered. "I know that Richard Chen was your lover. I know that you were going to run away together. I know that the money was for both of you, not for the band. I know that my father decided to stay with his wife, and that left you with no way out except to return the money and disappear." William's body tensed. His monitor showed elevated heart rate. "How do you know this?" he asked. "Marcus told me. His father told him. And his father told me so that I would understand what I actually did when I brought you and Robert together." "Why would he want you to know this?" William asked. "Because his father is dying, and he's trying to clean up his conscience before he goes. He wanted someone to know the truth." William lay in silence for a long moment. Then he started to laugh, a fractured, painful sound that turned into coughing. She helped him with water, waited for him to recover. "Do you understand what you've done?" William asked when he could speak again. "I gave you a chance to apologize for something you think you did wrong. Even though you didn't, I helped maintain a lie that makes everyone feel better." "No," William said. "You gave me permission to die without hatred. Before this morning, I hated Robert Stone. I hated him for exiling me. I hated him for letting me disappear. I hated him for never trying to find me, never trying to understand. That hatred was all I had left. It was what kept me alive long enough to get here, to get to this moment where I might finally confront him. But now I have something else. I have the chance to believe that he was merciful. I have the chance to believe that my best friend in the end chose kindness over cruelty. And yes, maybe that's a lie. Maybe the truth is uglier and more complicated. But what does the truth matter now? What does it matter if I leave this world believing that someone loved me, even if that love was imperfect?" Sarah felt something break inside her. "I destroyed your narrative. I destroyed your ability to leave thinking that someone cared." "No," William said. "You gave me permission to accept care, even if it's imperfect, even if it's motivated by self-protection rather than genuine mercy. In the end, does it matter what the motivation was? The act of kindness is still kind." He closed his eyes. "Let me tell you something about regrets, young lady," William continued. "I have spent 40 years believing I was destroyed by Robert Stone. I have spent 40 years living as a ghost because I thought I'd been betrayed and exiled. And all that time, I could have been asking for forgiveness. I could have been contacting him, writing him, trying to explain, but I didn't. I accepted the exile because I thought I deserved it." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because deep down, I knew what I'd done was wrong."
I knew that stealing money for an affair was inexcusable, and so I punished myself by accepting that Robert's silence was judgment. I made myself a ghost because I believed I deserved to be unseen. William opened his eyes and looked at Sarah. "But what you did," he said, "what you did was give me permission to believe that maybe I wasn't so unforgivable. Maybe I wasn't the monster I'd convinced myself I was. And that permission, that gift, is worth more than the truth would ever be." "I don't think that's right," Sarah said. "It doesn't matter what you think is right," William said gently. "It matters what allows people to die in peace. And now I can die knowing that somewhere in this world, at least one person understood me enough to give me a chance to apologize. Even if the understanding was based on a lie, even if the truth was uglier.
William closed his eyes again, and Sarah sat with him in silence until his breathing deepened into sleep. William Cross died 3 days later at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Sarah wasn't present. She'd requested the evening off, unable to bear the thought of watching him slip away. She was at home, sitting in the dark, when Marcus called to tell her. He went peacefully, Marcus said. His wife was with him. Robert was there too. They held hands at the end. Sarah didn't ask if Robert had known the truth. She assumed he hadn't. She assumed that her revelation to William had stayed contained, that William had taken the truth about Richard Chen, about the affair, about the real reason for the embezzlement, and had kept it private. The funeral happened 2 weeks later. Sarah didn't attend, but she read the obituary. William Cross, beloved husband, father, and friend. No mention of Midnight Rebellion, no mention of embezzlement, no mention of the 40 years of self-imposed exile. Just a man who had died surrounded by people who loved him. Robert Stone recovered fully from his injuries. His family took him home. 3 months later, he released a new album, a mostly instrumental record, just him, on guitar, playing variations on melodies that sounded familiar to anyone who had followed Midnight Rebellion. The album was dedicated to a friend I should have honored while I had the chance. Sarah never read if Robert knew the truth or not. She didn't need to know. She'd made her peace with the fact that some truths are better buried, and that sometimes the most ethical choice is to accept beautiful lies. But the experience changed her. She stopped pursuing the master's degree. She stopped trying to climb the professional hierarchy. Instead, she started a program in the hospital, a mentoring initiative for nurses who felt undervalued, unseen, and discouraged. She taught them not that they needed to be validated by the system, but that their work in itself was validation. That healing wasn't about hierarchy or credentials. It was about presence, compassion, and the willingness to see patients as whole human beings rather than medical problems. 2 years after William died, Sarah was promoted to a position she didn't expect, palliative care director. Not because of the master's degree she didn't have, but because of her reputation for compassion and her understanding that sometimes the most important medical decision a nurse can make is to prioritize a patient's peace over protocol. Margaret Stone funded the position. She also became a friend, a complicated friendship based on shared understanding that sometimes the right choice and the ethical choice are not the same thing. And Sarah never told anyone the full truth about what had happened, not about Richard Chen's affair, not about William's real motivations, not about the comfortable lie that had allowed 2 broken men to find peace in their final days. Because she learned something that no nursing textbook could teach, that sometimes the greatest act of humanity is to let people believe in the best version of their own story, even if the truth is more complicated. Not because the truth doesn't matter, but because people matter more.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.